You never really hear the guillotine drop until it's already too late. I was standing by the giant panoramic window of the Arcform headquarters that morning, looking out at the rain streaking against the glass like the city itself was trying to wash away its sins. Behind me, I heard the door click open, 2 sets of heels tapping across the marble floor. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. Nathan. Cameron Hayes' voice was as smooth as the whiskey he favored. "Let's make this quick." I turned, and there she was, Sienna Blake, standing just to his left, perfectly poised like she belonged on the cover of some glossy magazine instead of a design firm that built gear for survivalists and mountaineers. She wore a blood-red blazer and heels sharp enough to gut a man. Her expression was a mask of corporate empathy, the kind that barely concealed the disdain lurking beneath. "Nathan," she started, clasping her manicured hands in front of her like a preacher delivering bad news wrapped in a sermon. "We're moving in a new direction, fresh perspectives, modern aesthetics. The board agrees it's time for Arcform to evolve beyond, well, beyond the utilitarian. Beyond the utilitarian." I'd spent 17 years designing products that didn't just look good under studio lights but kept people alive in the worst conditions nature could conjure. And now that philosophy was being reduced to a footnote in a marketing presentation. I glanced at Cameron. His eyes didn't meet mine. Effective immediately, Sienna continued, sliding a pristine white envelope across the conference table, "You're relieved of your duties as head of product design." I didn't reach for the envelope. Instead, my gaze locked on hers. "I suppose Logan Pierce is the new golden boy now." Her lips curled into something that was supposed to be a smile. "Logan understands the current market expectations. He brings sophistication." I didn't argue. What would have been the point? Cameron had already sold the company's soul the moment he brought her in from that overpriced fashion house. And Logan, fresh out of his luxury brand bubble, knew how to design hiking boots that looked great in Instagram photos but couldn't survive a muddy trail, let alone a mountain storm. As I walked out of that office for the last time, I passed the design studio where a large poster already displayed the tagline for their upcoming product launch. The Elevation Series, designed for the peak of style. Funny thing was, those designs were mine. I'd spent months working on that modular backpack system, the all-weather jacket line that adapted to shifting climates, even the ergonomic tent layouts. Sienna had dismissed them all as uninspired not long ago. And now? Now they were repackaged, renamed, and, most importantly, credited to Logan Pierce. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I held it together. Years in this industry had taught me that the loudest man in the room is often the weakest. So I kept my head down, packed my sketchbooks and prototype schematics, and walked out of Arcform's sleek, glass-towered mausoleum with nothing but a duffel bag and the weight of 7 wasted years on my shoulders. But they didn't realize one thing. They hadn't just pushed me out. They'd set me free. And freedom, well, freedom has a way of sharpening a man's purpose. They say when you hit rock bottom, the only way left is up. But no one tells you how long you might just lie there, staring at the darkness, wondering if it's even worth climbing again. Days blurred into nights in that apartment of mine overlooking the city skyline, once a view I found inspiring, now just a reminder of how fast everything I'd built had crumbled. The sketchbook sat unopened on my coffee table, silent witnesses to a career that had become irrelevant in the age of style over substance. The world didn't care if a product could survive a blizzard anymore. All it cared about was how good it looked next to a latte in a lifestyle influencer's photo. I remember sitting there one night, the rain falling steady against the windows, much like it had the day I walked out of Arcform. My fingers traced the frayed edge of an old leather-bound notebook, one my grandfather had given me years ago. Inside, faded pencil sketches and his spidery handwriting still lived. "Form follows function, Nathan. Remember, the prettiest bridge is useless if it collapses under weight." God, I could still hear his voice, rough like sandpaper but warm. He was a craftsman, a man who shaped canoes by hand in a world that had long since moved to fiberglass and factory lines. Yet his canoes outlasted them all. I ran my hand through my hair, leaned back, and laughed bitterly into the silence. Guess I didn't build my career to carry its own weight either, huh, old man? And then, right on cue, the universe threw me a rope. My phone buzzed. Ethan Cross. A name I hadn't seen flash on my screen in years. I answered on the second ring. Still breathing, Cole. His voice carried that same reckless edge it always had, like he'd just dared death to a round of poker and walked away richer for it. Barely, I admitted. Well, time to get off your ass. I've got someone you need to meet. Another recruiter? I muttered. Not exactly. Madeline Carter. You've heard of her. I sat up straighter. Ridgeline Supply. Bingo. She's looking for someone who understands what real gear is supposed to do. Not just how good it looks on a magazine spread. There was a pause, the faint clink of a glass over the line. Then his voice dropped a note lower. Word is, she's planning something big. Wants to eat Arcform's market share for breakfast. Sound like your kind of fight? It did. God help me, it really did. By the end of that week, I was sitting across from Madeline Carter in a cluttered office that smelled faintly of waxed canvas and machine oil, an environment that felt more like a design lab than a boardroom. Madeline wasn't like Sienna Blake. No pretense, no designer shoes stabbing the carpet. She wore hiking boots and a jacket that looked like it had actually seen a mountaintop. She cut straight to the point. I don't care about fashion shows, Nathan. I care about products that work when things go wrong. You think you can build that? For the first time in months, I felt something stir in my chest. Not anger. Not regret. Hope. I don't think I can, I told her. I know I can. That's how the Summit series was born, on a promise and a handshake over a battered oak desk. I threw myself into it completely. Weeks turned into months as I refined every detail, a modular backpack system that adjusted to weight distribution dynamically, outerwear that adapted to temperature shifts without bulking up, and camping gear engineered for endurance, not just aesthetics. I worked late most nights, living more in the Ridgeline factory than my own apartment. That's when the strange things started happening. One night, long past midnight, I wandered down to the production floor to review some prototype modifications. The place was dead quiet except for the occasional hum of standby machines. That's when I saw it, a workstation monitor still glowing faintly in the dark, a USB drive jutting out like some forgotten relic. It wasn't labeled. Curiosity got the better of me. I slid into the chair, opened the File Explorer, and found only one file. Password protected, naturally. But what caught my attention was the name of the file. Not all enemies stand across the line. My gut tightened. Was this some kind of threat? A warning? Or something else entirely? I stared at that screen for a long moment, the hum of the machinery in the background sounding suddenly louder, almost oppressive. Somewhere out there, someone was playing a game, and I wasn't sure if I was the player, or the pawn. But either way, I had no intention of folding. In every storm, there's a moment when the wind dies and the world feels unnervingly still. That's how it felt when the news hit. Arcform had officially announced the early release of their Elevation series. Not in the fall, like everyone expected, but mid-summer, just weeks from now. The press release was a masterpiece of corporate arrogance. The future of outdoor gear arrives early, elevate your adventure with designs unlike anything the market has seen. Designs unlike anything the market had seen. They had my fingerprints all over them. By noon, the media circus was in full swing. First came the leaked rumors. Nathan Cole, disgraced former head of design, had stolen Arcform's confidential files. Then the official statements followed, carefully worded but dripping with insinuation. Legal threats. Whispers of a lawsuit. Madeline Carter stormed into my office, the accusation-laden headlines flashing across her tablet. Tell me this is a joke, Nathan, she said, eyes sharp, voice low and controlled, but I could feel the tension boiling underneath. "It's a coordinated hit piece," I said calmly, though my stomach was a knot of ice. "They're scared. That's all this is. Scared or not, they've planted doubt. And in this industry, perception is reality." I knew she was right. The Summit series wasn't just a product line, it was a statement. And Arcform was doing everything they could to crush it before it even breathed its first. But what happened next hit harder than any media scandal could. It started with a simple quality check report, one red flag among a sea of green. Then another. And another. By the end of the day, it was undeniable, the primary batch of raw materials for our weatherproof fabrics had been compromised. The waterproof membranes were failing under stress tests. Seams that should have held under hurricane-level winds tore apart under simulated moderate conditions. If we moved forward with production as is, the Summit series would crash and burn before it even reached the shelves. Madeline called an emergency meeting. I sat at the head of the table, staring down at the report spread before me. My team looked exhausted, confused. We triple-checked every supplier, our logistics manager insisted. Everything was certified. On paper, it's flawless. And in reality? I asked, though we all knew the answer. Sabotage. The question was, who? That night, long after the others had gone home, I sat alone in the prototype lab, flipping through every transaction, every shipment manifest, every name I could remember. And one name kept surfacing, Daniel Brooks. He was the most recent addition to our team, an old acquaintance from my Arcform days. Honest. Reliable. Or so I thought. The betrayal settled over me like wet concrete. I called him in early the next morning, straight-faced and cold. "Daniel," I began, my voice flat, "is there something you need to tell me?" He looked genuinely confused. "About what?" "The material swaps. The sabotage." His brows furrowed deeply. "Nathan, are you serious?" "I left Arcform because I couldn't stand what it had become. I came here because I believe in what we're building. You think I'd throw that away?" The conviction in his voice was unsettling because it sounded real. But then I remembered the USB. That forgotten device still sitting in my desk drawer. I plugged it into my laptop and started digging deeper, breaking through the encryption with every tool I had. And when the final layer peeled back, the truth stared me in the face like a punch to the gut. Access logs, compiled by Ethan Cross. My friend. My so-called savior when I was drowning. The files contain detailed documentation of every compromised shipment, every material substitution. It was all there, with timestamps and internal Arcform correspondence. And then, at the bottom of the final document, a single line in plain text. "Not all enemies stand across the line. Sometimes they sit right beside you." I sat back in my chair, my chest hollow. Ethan. The man who pulled me out of my darkest moment had been the one tightening the noose the entire time. It all made sense now. His perfectly timed reappearance. The casual way he'd steered me toward Madeline and Ridgeline. He wasn't just helping me start over. He was helping Sienna Blake kill my career quietly, from the inside. And yet, he'd left me the breadcrumbs. The USB wasn't just evidence. It was his confession. His apology. His guilt. For hours, I sat in that chair, staring at the message, the weight of it pressing down on me like the mountains I once climbed. By dawn, my decision was made. I didn't confront him. I didn't expose him to the board or the team. I simply bought a one-way plane ticket under his name and had it delivered to his apartment, along with a handwritten note. Or find yourself again, or stay lost forever. By noon, Ethan Cross was gone. No word. No trace. Like a shadow that finally realized it had no place in the light. And I returned to the factory floor. Sleeves rolled up, hands dirty. I rebuilt our supply lines from the ground up. Worked side by side with our engineers and technicians, correcting every flaw, testing every product myself until my hands were raw and my voice hoarse from barking orders and encouragement in equal measure. I became a fixture on that production floor, sleeping only when exhaustion demanded it, eating whatever vending machine dinner I could grab between rounds of problem solving. Word spread through the factory. The man who bore the weight of failure had decided to bear the weight of redemption too. One night, as we finally passed our final round of stress tests, Madeline found me sitting on the concrete floor, my back against the cool steel of the prototype rack. "You don't have to carry all of this alone, you know," she said quietly. I looked up, wiped the sweat from my brow, and for the first time in weeks, allowed myself a small, weary smile. "I'm not," I told her. "Not anymore. Because sometimes, when everything's stripped away, your reputation, your pride, even the people you trusted, you're left with something far more valuable. Clarity. And in that clarity, you find a purpose worth fighting for all over again." The Summit series hit the market a full month before Arcform's highly anticipated Elevation launch. But it didn't just hit, it detonated. In less than 24 hours, our online store crashed twice under the weight of incoming traffic. Retailers who had been cautious before were now calling Madeline's office non-stop, begging for more inventory, doubling and tripling their pre-orders. Outdoor forums lit up with early reviews. "Finally, a system designed by someone who understands the mountains, not a runway." And the industry journalists? They couldn't write fast enough. The best part wasn't seeing the orders roll in. It was seeing the pictures. Real people, guides, climbers, field medics, testing the gear in the harshest conditions and reporting back with the kind of raw enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. They weren't talking about how good the gear looked. They were talking about how it performed. And that was everything. A week later, I found myself standing on a familiar ridge just outside the city, the wind slicing through the peaks, the rain cold and relentless. Exactly the kind of environment I had designed the Summit series for. I pulled the hood of the modular jacket tighter around my face, felt the heat retention system kick in as the temperature dropped. Every part of this gear, from the reinforced seams to the pressure-tested zippers, had been built for this moment. And it held. No freezing drafts. No water seeping through. Just warmth and resilience against the storm. That's when my phone buzzed. A single message from Madeline lit up the screen. The battle's begun. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the rain wash over me, watching the storm roll across the horizon. This time, I didn't feel small beneath it. 2 days later, I walked into the International Outdoor Gear Expo, a massive convention center buzzing with industry elites and journalists. The air practically vibrated with the tension between two titans, Ridgeline and Arcform. And there she was. Sienna Blake. She stood under the cold glow of the exhibition lights, a vision of poised defiance in a tailored ivory suit. Her expression was unreadable as she crossed the floor toward me, heels clicking against the polished marble like a countdown. "Congratulations," she said, her voice low, eyes locked onto mine. "I assume you're enjoying your moment." I met her gaze without flinching. "It's not a moment, Sienna," I said evenly. "It's the result of everything you threw away." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it, just exhaustion and something deeper. Bitterness. "Do you know why I fought so hard, Nathan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Why I pushed and clawed and stepped over people like you?" I didn't answer. I let her speak. "Because I was nothing once," she continued. "A failed designer. Rejected by every house that mattered. I spent years watching people less talented, less driven, take what I couldn't have. So I swore it would never happen again. That I'd rise, no matter who I had to bury along the way." She exhaled sharply, as if finally admitting it out loud lifted some impossible weight off her chest. I studied her for a long moment, and in that fractured silence, I saw it. The loneliness. The cost of her ambition wasn't success, it was isolation. You didn't lose because I won, Sienna, I said quietly. You lost because at the end of all this, you have nothing left but your resentment. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw her flinch. But then, just as quickly, she straightened her shoulders, masking whatever humanity had flickered through. Enjoy your victory, Nathan, she said with a tight smile. But remember, nothing lasts forever. Maybe not, I agreed. But some things are built to endure. And that's more than you ever understood. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowds and camera flashes, swallowed up by the very image-driven world she had sacrificed everything to belong to. And me? I walked back toward the Ridgeline booth, past rows of displays showcasing the Summit series. My name was etched proudly on the product tags now. Not hidden. Not buried behind corporate slogans. Visible. Respected. That was the real victory. Not the applause. Not the sales numbers. But the simple, undeniable fact. My work finally spoke for itself. The fall came fast for Artform, faster than any of us predicted. Barely a month after the International Expo, headlines broke that the Elevation series had been officially postponed. Indefinitely. The announcement was clinical, buried under phrases like strategic reassessment and product refinement. But everyone in the industry knew what it really meant. They'd lost. Cameron Hayes resigned within weeks, vanishing quietly from the public eye, his grand plans for a fashion-driven empire reduced to a cautionary tale in executive boardrooms. And Sienna Blake? She disappeared too. No dramatic farewell. No public apology. Just, gone. Madeline kept me informed with every development, but by then, we were too busy steering Ridgeline through a success neither of us had quite dared to believe possible. The Summit series was more than a triumph, it was a turning point. We weren't just dominating the domestic market, we were preparing to take it global. Contracts with major European distributors were being inked, and whispers of expansion into Asia were no longer whispers. Ridgeline had become what Artform could only pretend to be, a brand that stood for something real. And yet, even in the midst of all that victory, there was a strange quiet inside me. Maybe it was the calm after a storm. Or maybe, it was the realization that the summit wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The package arrived on a cold, gray morning in late October. No return address. Just my name, written in tight, precise handwriting I immediately recognized. Daniel Brooks. I opened the box carefully, my fingers brushing over aged leather before I even registered what it was. One of my old design journals, the one I thought had vanished years ago. Tucked inside was a folded note. Sienna's gone. Thought you should have this. All that's left of a time when ambition outpaced purpose. No signature. But it didn't need one. I sank into my chair, the journal heavy in my lap. Slowly, I turned the brittle pages, each sketch a glimpse back into a version of myself I hadn't seen in a long time. Then I found it, buried near the back, half-finished but unmistakable. A concept for a modular extreme weather tent system. A design that could withstand sub-zero temperatures and violent storms, adaptable to both solo treks and large expeditions. I'd never submitted it. It was the kind of idea that felt too ambitious back then, too risky to even try pitching to the old Artform leadership. And yet here it was, waiting. Like it had been sitting there all these years for this exact moment. I stared at it for a long while before reaching for my phone. Madeline answered before the first ring finished. You sound like you're already working, I said, smiling despite myself. You think expansion plans write themselves, she teased. What's up? I traced a finger over the bold lines of that old sketch, the ideas already forming faster than I could keep up with. I have an idea for this winter's collection, I told her quietly. And this time, it won't be another unfinished sketch. There was a pause on the other end. Then, in that familiar voice that had become the steady foundation beneath this entire journey, she replied, "Tell me everything." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. And just like that, a new chapter began.